Hello, everyone. You're listening to episode 17 of the Merge Marketing Podcast. Today, we're chatting about why Canada is one of the greatest countries to live, specifically from an immigration perspective. All right, let's merge over to the interview.
You're listening to the Merged Marketing Podcast with David Louch and Jason Hunt. This is a show all about unlocking the marketing tactics and secrets behind everyday brands. Each week, we'll bring you expert commentary so that you can make better choices when it comes to growing your business. Thank you for spending time with us. Now let the show begin.
Hello, everyone. Thank you and welcome to the Merge Marketing Podcast. Our guest today is Brandon Miller, Managing Director at Maple Immigration Services. Brandon is a certified immigration consultant with ICCRC and the founder of Maple Immigration Services. He is passionate about everything immigration and enjoys helping people come to Canada as well as seeing them happily integrated. Although his main focus is to provide immigration legal services, he has also worked as a settlement counselor, a volunteer to the regulatory body, and a teacher and mentor at a local college of immigration students. He is also a family man living in Toronto with his wife and two young daughters. We are happy to be chatting with him today. Brandon, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Okay, Brandon. So before we get right into the interview today, I'd just love for you to tell the Merge Nation a little bit more about yourself, as well as, more importantly, what makes Canada such a great place to live and immigrate.
Okay, great. Well, listen, I got into immigration about 10 years ago. What had happened was I originally started studying law, and then I ended up overseas for about 10 years. I started off teaching English and then opened up different businesses over there. But what had happened was I was working on a contract with an educational company, and they had an immigration component to them. So I have always had an interest in law. It's always served me well, and it was always something that I was interested in. I got into my early 30s, and I just decided I wasn't really happy in the educational sphere, and I switched gears. So the interesting thing that I find is that I spent so many years outside of Canada that I decided to come back, and I think that was precipitated by the fact that I had my first daughter. And it was one of the reasons that I decided to come back to Canada because, and it's frankly a lot of the same reasons that a lot of my clients come here, is because they're looking for a nice, secure and safe place to live. And Canada certainly provides that. Your other question about some of the benefits of what Canada provides, I think anybody who's here listening to it understands what a great place we live in, if you've been around. But we have, we have a number of different things here. So I think that, currently in our current situation, I think we're all appreciative of the medical services that we enjoy. We have a pretty strong financial system. I have to say that I'm pretty happy with some of the things that have been going on recently with the government subsidies as a business owner. Obviously, there's excellent benefits for children and just quality of life. I could go on for an hour, Dave, but it's a great place, man. We consistently rank high and for good reason.
So it's interesting. You mentioned that's what got you into it was living in another country. Which country were you teaching in?
So I started off teaching in Korea. I was going to go for a year, and strangely enough, I went for that year, and I was going to come back to a job that I was offered, and then I just came back and I said, "Yeah, I think I'm going to stay." So I stayed for 4.5 years there. Came back to Toronto, started a business, and decided that I was going to be back in Asia because it was most of my business was focused there. But in my 4 years over there, I traveled all over Asia. And one of the places that I really found, intriguing was the Philippines. And the reason that I liked it so much is because I was an avid scuba diver at the time. And I really liked the fact that everybody spoke English really well. Living in Northeast Asia there, I fun fact, I learned how to speak Korean quite well, actually. But I was missing the English, and I was missing the access to a lot of the stuff. So I ended up in the Philippines for about 8 years, with back and forth in Hong Kong, and then I finished off in the Middle East. I was specifically in Kuwait, which I've traveled that whole region as well. So that was predominantly where I was spending most of my time. Yeah.
I have a background in teaching English in Japan. After I
Oh,
finished
okay. Yeah.
university, after I finished university, I wanted to extend my college life as much as I could, and the best way to do that is go teach English in another country. You're doing the same things you were doing in university. Instead of educating yourself, you're
Yeah.
teaching English, and ended up I same thing. I planned on staying for one turned into four. And next thing you know, 4 years later, I came to a crossroads where it was like, hey, I can stay here for another four, or go back home to Canada. And I took the road that led me back home to Canada and started a
Yeah.
job here. So, but
Yeah.
it wasn't easy. It was not an easy decision to leave Japan. I mean, you have all these foundations of relationships that you have, and then they just kind of sever. You
Yeah.
know?
Yeah, no, I totally understand that. Funny you say that, because one of my professors said, he put it as, oh, if you're going to do that and you're not sure what you're doing, you're hitting the snooze button on life. And I was like, yeah,
Hmm.
that always stuck with me.
Hmm.
So yeah, exactly. But total extension of university.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah,
So,
and for me, this is an interesting conversation because here I'm talking to two guys, and you've both had extensive experience traveling the world and living in different areas in the world, and I am on the total other end of the spectrum where I have barely traveled even on vacation to other areas of the world, and I definitely have not lived anywhere else. So I'm curious to know from both of your perspectives, was the experience of living in different parts of the world for extended periods of time what ultimately helped you realize and appreciate this great country of Canada that we live in and all of the services that we have, and ultimately what got you to come back here?
I mean, for myself, I mean, living in Japan was essentially flipping the world as I knew it upside down. I'm basically living in an area of concrete jungles and rice fields, and I'm taking the bike everywhere. I'm taking the train everywhere. I don't own a car, but what it really did for me is open up my eyes and make me more open minded to a lot of other cultures, different customs, all that type of stuff. But at the end of the day, it was always being compared to what was normal to me, which is Canadian culture and Canadian lifestyle. So although I know there's that, as they say, greener grass on the other side, I was able to experience it. But on the same time and in the same notion, Canada's home. I love Canada and I love being here, aside from obviously family and friends and all that sort of stuff. But this is really my comfort zone.
Yeah, I very similar. It really flipped things on its head for me, but I think that was part of the drug, if you will. I like one of the main reasons that I stayed is in my first year. In Canada, we don't learn a lot about, at least in high school. You could take some classes in university if you were so inclined, but we don't really learn a lot. We learn a lot more European history as opposed to Asian history. That was, I was learning new stuff all the time. That was one thing that was really exciting for me. The other thing is too is that I notice a lot of people, they run around and they say, "Oh yeah, Canada's the best country in the world," and this and that, but they don't really have anything to compare it to. And I actually do. I've traveled much more than the places that I've lived, and I can tell you, we got a really good deal here. I think even now with the current situation, we're starting to see some of the level of support. And again, not to dwell on that, but I just it makes me even feel a lot better that because I'm speaking to people on a daily basis who are in different areas of the world and listening how that's going, and we're doing a pretty good job. So yeah, I really appreciate here, and I think I appreciate it even more now that I do. I remember somebody, I was sitting there when I got back, and I was sitting in a line, and somebody was complaining about how long the line was, and I was like, "Man, I love standing in this line because where I've been, it's just a free for all. Like, I remember sitting at a fast food restaurant. There's no lines. People are just rushing the counter and getting in where they can and pushing and shoving. So I was like, this line's great. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, thanks for sharing that, guys. And Brandon, kind of getting a little bit back to the interview and what we want to chat with you today about. We've kind of alluded to a few of the things that make Canada such a great country for people to immigrate to, such as access to healthcare or just an overall better way of living than maybe where they were before. But with this being largely a business and marketing show, I'm curious to know what's attractive from a business perspective for immigrants looking to start their own business. Like, are there things here that attract business owners or potential entrepreneurs from other areas of the world to come here and start
Wow,
a
what a,
business?
what a what a great question. So, right now, there's a lot of people that are coming in and they're buying different businesses,
Hmm.
usually smaller businesses, and they're running them. It's under a program called an owner operator. The program's been around for a while, but it goes through different cycles of how it's used. Normally, a lot of people they'll look at it in terms of you know. A method to come in and move here and live here and then they already have their job, because one of the things that I always remind people is that coming here, immigrating here is actually the easy part. Settling here is a whole different deal.
Right.
And that's actually the difficult part. So it's like, yay, everyone's so focused on getting their visa, as they call it, or their permanent residence, and then they're like, great, I got it. Now what am I going to do? How am I going to use my skills? How am I going to get into the job market? How am I going to do all of this stuff? Buying a business kind of absolves you of that, because that actually gives you something to run. But in terms of the support, like a lot of times, if you're starting a business here, for instance, say you have an existing business overseas and you want to set it up here, there's very strategic reasons. So I'll give you one right now. NAFTA, or the USMCA as it's being called now, that allows pretty much access into it allows access into the U.S. market, obviously in Mexico. There's obviously some different changes with that now, but there's also a number of different other agreements that allow for worker mobility. So, for instance, we have European trade agreements. We have agreements with the TPP, where the U.S. pulled out of. That's still somewhat of an option for us. There's agreements with Korea. There's Chile. There's Colombia and Europe. So again, there's a lot of different advantages in terms of worker mobility to be able to do that. A lot of people look at it in terms of their travel ability and being able to set up a business and move things along. I had a client actually that came in here, started a business. And he within a year and a half, he'd grown that business to multiple $1 million business. And what he was doing was he was exporting goods from here back to his home country. So a lot of people, if they have the skills, they can start the business. There's a lot of opportunity for that. Also with government support, Canada is really, really good with that stuff. And there's a lot of different support mechanisms, and again, we're seeing that nowadays for a lot of businesses, and yeah, that's a lot of great things in that respect.
Hmm. Interesting. So you mentioned earlier that getting here is the easy part.
Hmm.
And so is it easier for people that have a business that they're starting or that they're buying into, so to speak? Does that give them an additional advantage over others that may not?
Uh, Yes and no. If they have a business overseas, depending on what they want to do and how they want to set that up over here, that might be a good option for them.
Hmm.
However, if they're buying a business, I caution people to starting a business with no track record. It's always preferable to buy something that's in existence and that you can show has the ability to run. That's always, from a government standpoint, when they're looking at the work permits and the viability of the business, that always sits a little bit better. And again, I'm speaking on very general terms because there are, and there have existed different provincial programs that would address those. For instance, BC had one there where you could buy a business in distress, and the whole idea is that somebody was coming in to try to save jobs and different things. Great on the surface, but really the prospective new immigrant that's buying that business is already kind of at a bit of a loss because he's trying to save something that's failing, right?
Right.
He or she, I should say. So, yeah, yeah.
Do you notice that franchises specifically are really attractive for new Canadians to open up because of it's kind of an easy start off point. Everything's kind of handed to you, and is what is the reason why franchises are so popular for new Canadians?
Well, the benefit to franchises is that you're buying a system, right? So, they have all the guides, they have uh, all of the knowledge and the proven system, air quotes on that, right? So, depending on it, because I've been approached by some franchises, and I've never heard of them, and B, they're like, it's tricky. So let me just quantify that a little bit. So a lot of times, some of the franchises that we would think of in kind of the top tier, and again, let's take what I'm saying with a grain of salt because I'm not a franchise expert, but what my understanding is a lot of the people that are running those higher tiered franchises, like say a McDonald's or a Tim Hortons, they don't really want to hedge their bet on somebody that is going to mess up their brand, right? I'm not going to mention any names, but there is one well-known or semi-well-known franchise in the Ontario region here that's actually going through to repair their brand because they actually let people come in, take over the franchises. They did a big sell overseas. And then people were coming in and not following their system at all. So you'd walk into this particular franchise and you would find, oh, there's their core menu, but I'm going to sell, Jamaican pies, and I'm going to sell this, and then they would just start selling whatever they wanted in the franchise. So now what they've done is they're trying to kind of that's actually something that's gone wrong. So unfortunately, people are very limited. The franchisors are looking at people that are going to be able to operate in their system and not deviate. And even if you or I, as a Canadian, went out to go through for a potential franchisee, they have a pretty stringent criteria. So it's even more so on the immigrant side as well. Because they want to make sure that those issues are taken care of, while at the same time they also want to protect the integrity of the brand and all of that stuff. But there are options there, and mostly what we find is maybe not a new franchise, maybe an existing franchise, or even just buying to a portion of a franchise is another option. So.
Interesting. Okay, well, let's transition a little bit to a little bit of COVID-19 talk, and I don't want to dive too deep into COVID-19, but I am curious to know what impact it has had on immigration into Canada, and what things might look like long term for this country as a result.
Okay. Whew, I'm going to take a deep breath here and cut me off anytime. So the impact has been monumental. We've seen things happen that obviously have not happened, and I think every industry is like that. But immigration, and again, I'm always one of the first people to criticize, but I'm also one of the first people to commend when a good job is being done. And I have to say, IRCC, the government is doing a fantastic job considering what they have. They've been communicating very well with us through the industry association. They've been keeping everybody updated. As of the day of this recording that we're doing, I had something that has not even been announced publicly by the government. It just happened today. And that was one of my clients was landed via letter. So that's one of the biggest things. And what that means is that he had already been approved for his permanent residence. And then what had happened was we just got a letter. And normally the process is that you have to go into an office, you have to, they go over a form, which is a landing document, you sign it, and then they say, congratulations, welcome to Canada. Or you do that at the airport when you land or whatever that may be with the CBSA officer. They had talked about doing phone interviews, like they had the provision to be able to do phone landings. But as of today, we saw something totally new, and I got a letter in my representative's portal, and it said, hey, congratulations, you're a permanent resident. This letter is now your permanent residency. So that's new. What you're seeing in the news mostly, though, is the travel ban. That's been a big one, and you could see that was a really good instance of something that was very fluid. And again, this is where I commend the department, because they really reacted and they really did things very quickly. What they did is they stopped everybody from coming in, except if you're a Canadian or permanent resident. And then what they did is they said, we got a problem. There was a story about a caregiver that was down in Mexico with her family from the Philippines on vacation, and she got caught up in this travel ban. And what had happened is she got stuck in Mexico. She couldn't come back to Canada, and she couldn't get back to the Philippines either. So she was stuck there. But what you saw is the government was like, maybe we should have another think about that. And then they said, okay, anybody who's on a student visa or who's on a work permit prior to March 18th was the date, then they could still come in. We've also seen some changes in the way that they're administering things. So, for instance, when somebody comes here as a student, they have to for the post-grad work permit. So after they finish studying as a student, they'll do a post-grad work permit. And what happens is the post-grad work permit allows them to work after school, but there's certain criteria that they have to fulfill. So the government has adapted on that one as well, and they've allowed people to study online as long as it's not more than 50% of their course, and they can do that from their home country outside of Canada, which is fantastic. And the reason for that is because, quite frankly, nobody can travel here. And I'd like to think that the government is also taking into account the sheer volume of money that comes into this country via the international student. You're talking billions and billions of dollars. And quite frankly, we wouldn't have an education system to the likes of what we have right now if there wasn't international students here and paying those hefty fees that they pay, which is the real cost of what it actually costs to go to school. So the government's adapted to that. They've seen that and they've done things there. But I think really to sum it up, what's very important about the whole thing is they've actually looked at the issues and they've adapted and they've come out with solutions. Sure, it's not perfect, but I gotta say, under the circumstances, these things would take 6-8 months to actually push through, and we're not. What's the word?
It's less about the politics now and more about just getting stuff done and helping people.
Yeah, and I think that's what I'm proud of most here is that we're actually doing that. Mm-hmm. Just to kind of side jump to something else there in terms of the business stuff that we've done here. Like I was speaking with a colleague down in the US. The money that's trickled down to small businesses, we were offered that $40,000 loan. I filled that out. It was 3 pages on the bank's website, and I had that within 5 days, like they said. I unheard of. I usually geez, you want to get an OSAP loan there. It's crazy, but no, I think the responsiveness has been phenomenal on across all of the different areas. So that's impressive.
And now a word from our sponsors.
This week's episode is brought to you by FreshCrowd. FreshCrowd is a full-service social media agency in Canada that specializes in everything social. From management to community building and advertising, FreshCrowd can help your business attract a fresh crowd of people. Visit freshcrowd.com to find out more.
Interesting. And so, how do you think this is going to affect your business into the future? Is your process going to
Ooh.
change from how you help people immigrate to this country? Is it going to change from a marketing perspective and how you advertise your services? What do you think is going to change for you, or has it already changed?
So we were predominantly online. We love technology in my company. So we didn't. It was very I was speaking to a colleague and they were trying to get webcams and they were sold out all over Toronto. And so just as an example, but so we pivoted quite quickly into that and working from home and doing all of that. And we preemptively shut down the office prior to being asked because we also provide fingerprinting in our office. We're accredited by the RCMP to do that. So, looking at the news and the high touch stuff, touching people's hands and staying, right next to them, we shut it down pretty quickly for that. However, how is it going to change? I think everything's going to change going forward. I think that there's a lot of companies right now that are looking like, do we really need all these people working here? And I know people flirted with the idea. I think back in the 90s, people were telecommuting. I remember my dad worked for one of the larger banks and he was working from home and, it was all over the phone and, dial up systems and all of that. But now, we're in a whole different spot. I know that a lot of people will be looking for it. And I would be very surprised if companies actually went back to that because I think that the side benefit to what we're seeing now is we're seeing a lot of really great stuff. Like we're looking at with this pause, all the noises stopped, so we're able to see what's going on in our businesses, where things are at. For me, I'm going to change things. Obviously, we've got a few things in the pipe that we're looking at and that we're currently working on. We've been, I don't want to say largely unaffected, like things have slowed down, now, but we're not finished. Everybody's still working at the company, and we're still pushing ahead. But one of the biggest things when this initial crisis happened, one of the first things I did is I spoke to some people in my industry that have been around a while. And, I said, hey, what do you think's going to happen? And I used September 11th as an example. I said, what happened after September 11th? And it's funny the answers I got. But in immigration, because you'll remember, like PRs were canceled and people were missing flights, all of the other stuff and that. And it was kind of a micro crisis, but it disrupted things a little bit. But a lot of people pulled back, right? So there's this big rush and we saw a big rush of people coming in. Oh my God, I'm stuck. What do I do? All these little issues. And so we had to fix those. And then people tend to pull back because they want to see what's going on. And then what's going to happen is that now we're going to get the all clear. Everything's going to go back to quote unquote normal. And then people are going to start rushing in the system. Oh, I got to get that done. I've taken a different tact with people and I've told them, I said, listen, you're sitting around, you're cleaning out your closets, you're organizing your pictures on your computer or doing all these things that you would never do anyways and have been on your list for years. Why don't you do something that's a little bit more productive? And that's prepare for when things open up. I've already seen it. I said this months ago, and we've already seen it with Canadian Experience Class, which is one of the immigration programs. The current score, the score to get in for that was in the 470s. Now, I don't want to get too far into the details on that, but we've seen that score drop down to 455 now because the government is still running. They're still running, albeit slower, but they're still running. So you got to the pause in the planet. It's put everybody on pause. So if they need, say, like an English test or an educational credential assessment or something, you're not going to be able to get those usually right now. So it's put everybody on stop. They're going to clear out the backlog. And then once those things open up, then, it's going to be a free for all. So you might as well start studying for your English test because as soon as you can book one, go do it, get it done and get it in quickly is what I think is the benefit there. So Yeah.
I think that's the thing, all right, is that everything has come to a standstill on all levels, and it's a matter of capitalizing on the opportunity to get ahead right now. And that goes across every single business. We're
100.
doing it, it's just like you just got to look at those opportunities now to get ahead and try to do all you can. All those excuses you had before about not having enough time to get to it or do it, now's the time to get it done.
Yeah, and that's I think anybody who can see that, I think that they're going to benefit from it later. So yeah, that's what we're seeing, anyways.
Hmm. Awesome. Well, thanks for sharing that. That was something I was super interested to know, is how this has impacted your business, but also people coming to this country, because thousands and thousands of people come here every single year, and I would imagine that that's going to be impacted for the next little bit. So, before we wrap up, is there anything that you'd like to dive a little bit deeper on in terms of the Maple immigration or the Maple process, in terms of how you help your clients?
I would, but I just wanted to pick up on what you were saying in terms of the future about people coming here. I actually think that what we're going to see after this, just to dovetail back into that,
Mhm.
is that I think that you're going to see, like, there's going to be a lot more people that are going to be coming here and more interest. There's already been a lot of interest in coming here, but I think you're going to see a lot more. And the reason I say that is because right now you're looking at a lot of different countries and how they're handling this current situation. And I know from speaking to people that I'm speaking with in all different areas of the world that they're quite concerned. And there's I don't want to name any countries, but there's yeah, people are handling it a lot differently, and I think that people are taking notice of that. The other thing is too is that this country can't effectively. The reason that we have so much immigration is that we can't actually compete, or we're not using our full potential because we don't have enough people here. That's why everyone's like, "Oh, stop the immigrants, stop the immigrants." It's the most ignorant thing to say, because actually we can thrive a lot more if we have more people, and there's study after study that confirms that, and that's why immigration is such a big thing. So, I think with the numbers that Parliament has announced, it's actually going to be a lot busier when this is done. I think there's going to be a big driving force for people to come here after it's done, and I think that once we get through all of this, I think certainly immigration is going to boom.
Mm.
In terms of what we do in the process, to answer your question there, obviously we help people. We represent their files, and we've always taken a real holistic process to immigration. And one of the things that I like to remind people is that as you heard me say before, the visa is not just, or the PR is not just, that's not the end of it, right?
Mm.
You have to think about, how are you going to settle in here. I had a call 2 days ago and they were like, "Oh, should I bring my family?" I'm like, yeah, maybe you should come first and get settled in, because you've got a lot. You've got to deal with kids that are in a new environment. You're going to have to deal with some language issues, some culture issues, and you're going to be starting a new job. Like, you know you can bring them. I appreciate all that, but just keep these things in mind. Whereas other people that are coming with no job, and they have to parlay that in, and that's one of the sad things. And I actually tell people, I've never seen anybody come here and rip their family up and move over here, and we're going to make a good go of it. As much as I respect that, that kind of explorer mentality of, like, let's go make a new life in the new land. I love it. I think it's great. However, I've told people, I said, maybe you should rethink about what you're doing. Because I don't think that, like, for instance, my favorite example of that is I deal with a lot of doctors, and they're in their 40s and 50s. And, I just tell them, I say, buddy, you're not going to practice medicine here. But if you start drilling down into it, and I think this is where I like to think that I provide a lot of value, is that we really choose our clients, and we really look at what's best for them. And it's not just about, like, oh, my next file retainer or whatever, because really at the end of the day, this is a person's life that they're uprooting. And what we see is that if when you start talking to that doctor, why do you want to come here? Oh, it's because I want my kids to have opportunities that I didn't have or that they can have in the future. Well, great. Instead of you screwing up your life and not being able to live your life to the full potential, why don't you send them as a student? They can come here. You can achieve that objective. You can continue to work, and you can immigrate later and spend your golden years here. But you don't have to throw your life or your career away for that goal. So again, it's just rethinking it, right? And it's not one solution that fits everybody. And I think that's where we really excel. Is that we want to make sure that people go in really informed, and they get out what they expect and what their dream is to be here.
Interesting. And do you is it just individuals that you work with, or do you also help institutions and businesses attract attract people to this country who they may
So,
want to attract to work for their organization?
so we mostly work with the individual. We do work with. We're not really. We do have some corporate clients that we work with, but not as much. Work mostly with the individuals, and we'll work with small or medium type businesses as well that want to bring in workers.
Hmm.
That's kind of where we're at. We're not really in the corporate market as much, but yeah, we generally bring in the individual most of the time. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, that's great. Jay, do you have any final comments there?
Yeah, no, I definitely. I mean, I've been to Brandon's office. I've been in there. It's you deal with quite a bit of different people on a regular basis,
Yeah.
right? And if you can give, I mean, our audience is a lot of business owners, entrepreneurs. What is your kind of standard? I mean, go to when you're going to deal with clients? How do you manage clients? How do you nurture clients to ensure they have a great experience when they work with you?
So we again, and I know this sounds, but in my logo it says trust, expertise, and personalized service, right? So those words were chosen with the client in mind, right? Because again, they have to give us their trust to be able to do that. Like literally, somebody's coming in and saying, "Okay, I'm going to put all of my future hopes on coming to this country into you and your service," right? That's a huge thing. And look, Jay, you know me too, right? Like uh, I'm always asking questions or things like that along the lines, and my clients are the same. And actually, those are the clients that I like working with the most. The clients that scare me are the people that don't ask the questions, and then they're like, "Oh, but what about this?" And it's like, "Yeah, that's something you should have asked about 6 months ago." I don't work with people like that. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to personalize the experience. We ask for them to put the trust in us to be able to do it. Obviously, we keep up on our expertise because that's what we're providing and that's the value that we're doing. But the last component of that is the personalized service. And what I get out of the personalized services is that a lot of places like prior, like in the early 2000s or before that, it was a very cookie cutter approach that was applied to this. Back in 2000, I think 13 or 12, I looked at it and it was just like you cannot get through the immigration system in this cookie cutter like templated type of application. And that's how I deal with our clients. Like I know every single client that I'm working with, and I know them as well as uh, not only on a professional basis, but I know a lot of what's going on personally. I always joke that I had a lady call me up and she asked me to help her with her taxes, and I was like, you know what, I really appreciate that you would come to me and ask me those questions, but I'm the worst person to be doing your taxes, but I will refer you over to a good person. So, but that the way I look at that is that that's really what we're striving for, is that we're striving to have that type of connection. And we've built that into a process. It took us about a year and a half to really unpack everything. And we've systematically put it together in a process that we have. And we're really, really happy about that because we're striving to provide that consistent type of experience for everybody that we work with. Yeah.
You can tell even just by talking to you and watching you interact with your clients that you genuinely care about your clients. And I think that needs to be a prerequisite for the industry that you're in, because people are looking for that sort of TLC from somebody that's managing, the kind of work that you're managing for them. Right. And I think that's almost imperative. And to sum it up, we could talk about this for a lot longer, talking about client management and things like that. But maybe you can give a shout out to the book that you recently published.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. So I put together a book. It's called Second Passport, and it's basically a guide to a safe, secure alternative home in Canada is the subheading of the book. And what I did is we've had a process that we've used, and we call it the immigration success system, where we looked at immigration as a whole. There's basically three phases. There's the planning, the implementation, and settlement. And the settlement is the one that, again, you've heard me allude to this a couple times, but this is where a lot of people have their issues, because they focus on that. And I was lucky because prior to actually becoming a regulated immigration person, I actually got to work and help people settle into Canada. And I was like, wow, this is tough. It's tough. And they're dealing with so many things. There's just getting here and getting your family settled and getting your job and getting the kids in school and setting up bank accounts and trying to navigate a foreign system. It's a lot of work. And I think sometimes a lot of people, they'll have this dream of coming to Canada. And I've seen people living overseas and they find out, it's always been my dream to go to Canada and this, and it really is a dream for a lot of people. They've seen people immigrating and they have this idea that, if they move there, then they're going to be rich and they're going to live happily ever after. It's not. It's actually, it's really tough to get going. And, this is what I like to tell people, and this is what the book is all about too in the last phase, because I point out that, like anything in life, right, you have to plan it, you have to do it, and then you just have to follow it up and keep consistent. So that's basically, I'm not writing any magic here. It's basically for anything. So you need to have a plan, and that's the first phase. And then the second thing is getting it done and getting it done properly. But then a lot of people think it stops there, and that's where it just begins. Because at least with the immigration application, there's it's regulated by like an act and immigration regulations and whatnot. Whereas settling into this, it's all like it's a free for all. Like, hey, you're here, great, okay, now go do. And they have government services for a lot of that stuff. I'm not a fan of most of them, truth be told, because I find that a lot of, and I should be very careful with what I'm saying, but I'm going to say it anyways. A lot of services are funded, and they're funded basically by the government, where they get paid for the number of bums on seats. And I've had some pretty big run-ins with some of them, because they'll ask them to take, for instance, English courses when the guy doesn't need an English course. He needs an accounting course, for instance, so he can learn how to use a piece of software that will get him a job. But they want him to do these other prerequisite courses, like write a resume for a week and different things like that, where Buddy just needs to get the skills so he can go get a job and he can get working. He doesn't need to sit in an organization for 2 months, and get more funding for that organization. And unfortunately, I'm not pointing the finger, because there is a lot of good ones, but unfortunately, there's a lot of people that are doing that, and that's where I try to empower my people to say, listen, don't just run around and do all of this stuff. Understand what you need to do. Have a plan prior to coming here, and then be able to use that plan so that you can hit the ground running. And that's actually the biggest trick right there, is just planning before you get here. There's 1,000 things you could do before you get here and when you're spending money to settle.
Awesome. Well, that's a perfect place to wrap up. Have a plan, and then ultimately do the work when you get here. So that's a good motto to live by for anybody. So Brandon, thanks a lot for sharing your wisdom today, telling us about your business, and providing us a little insight into something that is extremely important in this country to the way that we live and the services that we have access to. So for those that would like to get in touch with you to discuss anything further that you mentioned today, what's the best way for them to do that?
Great. Well, they can go to the website, which is mapleimmigration.ca, or give us a shout. Check us out on Google. There, you can find us easy, or just drop us a note at support@mapleimmigration.ca, and of course Facebook.
Of course, all the socials.
That's
Um,
it.
per- Perfect. Well, that's great. And so, one final question we end every single episode with, and this is going to be an interesting one for you, is if you could choose one person, dead or alive, to represent your brand, who would it be and why?
Oh wow, one person. So initially, when you said that, I don't know why that popped into my head, but I was going to say Jimi Hendrix, and I don't know why.
Jimi Hendrix.
Yeah, right. I don't even know. That just ran into my head. One person, dead or alive, to represent my brand. Honestly, I would have to say it would be my grandfather. And I know that just sounds really schmarmy, but it's true because a lot of what I do in my business, my grandfather ran his own businesses for a number of years, and he did it properly. And when I remember going to his funeral, and I remember meeting people just by chance that have known him over the years. Not a bad thing to say. And it was always like, I'd always get a story of how he helped somebody out or how he did something else. So yeah, that's one thing yeah, that's who I would say represent my brand, because it's internal to me. So famous in my world, maybe not in your world, but yeah,
Very cool.
that's it. Or we can go with Jimi Hendrix. That's up to you.
We'll take both. I'm sure your grandfather would love to have Jimmy as his sidekick. So
That's it,
that's
right?
great. Yeah. Well, thanks a lot for sharing, and we appreciate you being on the show today, Brandon.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.